From smoking 20 cigars a day to drinking cold milk and even dying after giving the longest inaugural address in freezing rain without a coat or hat. This is how every American president died. You won't believe what the last president said right before passing away. Let's begin with George Washington, who went down with a severe throat infection at his Mount Vernon estate in Virginia after riding for hours through icy rain and snow in December of 1799. Doctors drained nearly 80 ounces of blood in a single day as they sought to stabilize him, but this only made things worse. He passed on December 14th of 1799, whispering, "I am just going." But even Washington's tragic end couldn't match the eerie coincidence that came next. On July 4th of 1826, America lost its second and third presidents, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Adams died at his home in Quincy, Massachusetts, murmuring, "Thomas Jefferson survives." On the other side, Thomas Jefferson passed at Monticello, Virginia, saying, "I resign my spirit to God, my daughter, and my country." In the morning of June 28, 1826, James Madison lay in his bedroom in his home in Orange County, Virginia, having suffered a heart failure. One of his nieces asked how he felt. His reply? "Nothing more than a change of mind, my dear." He died a few hours later, just 6 days shy of America's birthday. But while Madison missed the nation's birthday, this next president completed the pattern started by Adams and Jefferson. James Monroe did actually check out on the 4th of July, 1831. The cause of his death was tuberculosis, heart troubles, and a lingering cough. Monroe's last words were a reflection of his deep friendship with his predecessor, Madison. "I regret that I should leave this world without again beholding him." Then came John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams. After retiring as president, Quincy went back to represent the state of Massachusetts in the House of Representatives. Then, on February 21st of 1848, he suffered a stroke. His colleagues carried him to the speaker's room in the Capitol, and a bed was prepared for him. He remained there for the next 2 days before dying on February 23rd, 1848. His reported last words were, "I am content." In 1845, Andrew Jackson suffered from tuberculosis, severe edema, chronic heart problems, and even potential lead or mercury exposure from old medical treatments. He died on June 8th of 1845 in his Tennessee plantation, The Hermitage, near Nashville. He left them with these words, "Oh, do not cry. Be good children, and we shall all meet in heaven." Martin Van Buren passed away on July 24th of 1862 at about 2 a.m. in his hometown of Kinderhook, New York. He had been suffering from bronchial asthma and heart failure. As he lay surrounded by his sons and a minister from the church, his final words were, "There is but one reliance." Van Buren's death might have been less eventful, but this next president actually set for the shortest time in office before meeting an untimely death. Imagine this. It's a cold morning on March the 4th of 1841. William Henry Harrison is standing coatless at the U.S. Capitol, delivering a nearly 2-hour inaugural address. 3 weeks later, he fell ill and died after just 31 days in office. Initial reports concluded that he succumbed to pneumonia. However, it was later confirmed that the cause of his death was likely typhoid or septic shock from contaminated water in the White House. His final words? "I understand the true principles of the government. I wish them carried out. I ask nothing more." His successor didn't fare any better, at least in reputation. During his tenure, John Tyler sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, so when he died of a stroke in 1862, the Union didn't officially mourn him. His last recorded words were brief. "Perhaps it is best." Then there's James K. Polk, hailed as the most hardworking president ever. After fulfilling his pledge to serve for only one term, he left office on March the 4th, 1849, and embarked on a southern tour with his wife, Sarah. While in New Orleans, he contracted cholera. By the time he was returning home to Nashville, Tennessee, his health had sharply declined. He succumbed on June 15, 1849. His recorded last words to his wife were deeply personal. "I love you, Sarah, for all eternity." On July 4, 1850, President Zachary Taylor attended Independence Day events at the Washington Monument. He came back to the White House thirsty and exhausted and decided to gorge on cherries and cold milk. Minutes later, he complained of violent stomach cramps, nausea, and fever. Despite treatment, he died 5 days later of acute gastroenteritis. Taylor's last words were, "My only regret is for the friends I leave behind me." In February 1874, Zachary Taylor's successor, Millard Fillmore, suffered a massive stroke at his home in Buffalo, New York. Then, on the morning of March 8, 1874, with his condition worsening, his attendants offered him a bowl of soup. With a faint smile, he said, "The nourishment is palatable." That would also turn out to be his last review, as well as his final words. But while Fillmore's death was due to an unpreventable cause, President Franklin Pierce's death might have been prevented. You see, a few weeks before his inauguration, he watched his 11-year-old son die in a horrific train derailment. As a way of coping, Pierce resorted to alcoholism, which caused liver cirrhosis and stomach inflammation. He spent his final days in obscurity in his Concord home in New Hampshire. In fact, there is no record of his final words, which goes to show just how saddening and lonely his death might have been. During the last final days of President James Buchanan in late May 1868, he lay quietly in his estate in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, perhaps reflecting on his life and career, grappling with the fact that history may judge him harshly due to his poor handling of the Civil War. As a respiratory failure that had started as a bad cold slowly ate him away, he lay in his bed, surrounded by his loved ones. It's during this period that he murmured his last words, "O Lord God Almighty, as thou wilt." If there's a death that needs no introduction, it's that of Abraham Lincoln. On the evening of April 14, 1865, President Lincoln was attending a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. As the play went on, actor John Wilkes Booth slipped into the presidential box and fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. Moments before the tragedy, Lincoln had turned to his wife and whispered softly, "She won't think anything about it," in response to his wife's concern that their friend would see them holding hands. It was a tender reassurance, and heartbreakingly, the last words he ever spoke. Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, died on July 31, 1875, after suffering a stroke while visiting his daughter's home in Elizabethton, Tennessee. Sadly, he had just returned to politics as a U.S. Senator when his health gave way. In his final moments, one side of his body was paralyzed, this prompting him to say, "I need no doctor." President Ulysses S. Grant spent the final months of his life battling an aggressive throat cancer caused by years of heavy cigar smoking, with reports stating that at times he would smoke up to 20 in a day. He breathed his last on July 23, 1885, in a remote cottage on Mount McGregor, New York. His last words? Water. Simply that. Then there's this next president whose love for his wife comforted him in his last moments alive. Rutherford B. Hayes was a man who did not shy away from expressing his love for his late wife Lucy, who passed on in 1889. Then, in 1892, he suffered several heart attacks, and his condition only worsened going forward. He passed away peacefully on January 17, 1893, at his home in Spiegel Grove, Fremont, Ohio. In his final moments, he expressed contentment at the thought of reuniting with Lucy, saying, "I'm going where Lucy is." On July 2, 1881, President James A. Garfield was shot twice at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. Fortunately, the bullets missed vital organs. However, his doctors neither sterilized their fingers nor the instruments they were using on him, causing a massive infection. After 79 agonizing days, Garfield succumbed to sepsis on September 19, 1881. He died in Elberon, New Jersey, with his last words being, "Swaim, can't you stop the pain?" Chester Arthur's health declined rapidly after his presidency ended in 1885. He was diagnosed with Bright's disease and was also suspected to have had underlying hypertension. He quietly passed away on November 18, 1886, in his home in New York. His last words were, "Life is not worth living," a stark reflection of his pain and resignation just before he passed on. While Arthur might have given up by the time of his death, President Grover Cleveland showed nothing but contentment while on his deathbed. After years of battling kidney disease and stomach troubles, Cleveland died of a heart attack on June 24, 1908, in his home in Princeton, New Jersey. His last words were, "I have tried so hard to do right." President Benjamin Harrison succumbed to pneumonia on March 13, 1901, at his home in Indianapolis, Indiana. Minutes before his death, he whispered, "Are there any doctors here?" Months later, William McKinley was shot by anarchist Leon Czolgosz on September 6 of 1901. Doctors initially believed he would recover as the wound was not severe. However, gangrene set in, and he died 8 days later. His final words to his wife Ida were calm and faithful. "God's will be done." Let's move on to the fearless Rough Rider Theodore Roosevelt. This is the president that once survived being shot mid-speech and kept talking for 84 minutes. However, years later, malaria and infections caught up with him, and on January 6, 1919, he died in his sleep at Sagamore Hill, whispering, "Put out the light, James." Then there is his successor, William Howard Taft, who died of heart failure on March 8, 1930, saying, "I'm feeling very badly." Then, just like a couple other presidents before him, Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke that left him frail. He passed away on February 3, 1924, in Washington, D.C. Minutes before his death, he sighed, "I am a broken piece of machinery." On August 2, 1923, President Warren G. Harding was on a tour in San Francisco when he suffered a fatal heart attack. His final words were to his wife, Florence, who was reading him a book. "Go on, read some more." His successor, Calvin Coolidge, died suddenly of a heart attack on January 5, 1933, after greeting a handyman with his last words, "Good morning, Robert." Herbert Hoover followed on October 20, 1964, dying quietly at age 90 from colon cancer. He's also one of the few presidents with no recorded farewell. Let's turn our attention to Franklin D. Roosevelt. On April 12, 1945, FDR was sitting for a portrait in Warm Springs, Georgia, when he got a massive cerebral hemorrhage before he died shortly after. His final words were, "I have terrific pain in the back of my head." Harry S. Truman, FDR's successor, lived to 88 before dying on December 26, 1972, at Research Hospital in Kansas City, Missouri. The cause of his death was reported to be multiple organ failure. Following him, Dwight D. Eisenhower, the revered World War II general, succumbed to heart failure at Walter Reed Hospital on March 28, 1969. His final words were rather prayerful, "God take me." Moving on to what is undoubtedly one of the darkest moments in American history, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. As JFK was riding in an open motorcade in Dallas on November 22, 1963, he didn't know that this was going to turn fatal in a few minutes. Referring to the massive crowd that had come to welcome him, Texas Governor John Connolly's wife said, "You certainly can't say that Dallas doesn't love you." JFK smiled and replied, "No, you certainly can't." Moments later, the fatal shots rang out and Kennedy was dead 30 minutes later. A decade later, Lyndon B. Johnson died of a heart attack on January 22, 1973, at his ranch in Johnson City, Texas. His final words were a summon to his Secret Service agent, "Send Mike immediately." Then we have Richard Nixon, that suffered a stroke on April 18, 1994, at his New Jersey home. His final word was, "Help," before falling into a coma and never waking up again. Gerald Ford followed on December 26, 2006, when he died peacefully at 93. The cause of his death was cardiovascular disease, with no known last words from him. After a long battle with Alzheimer's, Ronald Reagan passed away on June 5, 2004, at his home in Los Angeles. His daughter said that he seemed full of love in his last moments. George H.W. Bush breathed his last on November 30, 2018, at his home in Houston, Texas, age 94. Shortly before he died, he whispered to his son, "I love you too." And finally, Jimmy Carter, America's longest-lived president, passed away on December 29, 2024, in Plains, Georgia, telling his family he was ready to reunite with his wife, Rosalind. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and see you in the next one.